Some people like to say that I got a baby face. But trust me, when George Nelson does a job, it's not kid stuff.
This dark-hearted killer is a hero to outlaws and a villain to lawmen.
Quick on the trigger, quick to shoot people. If Dillinger is close to being the gentleman bandit, Babyface Nelson is close to being the homicidal lunatic.
I'm Melvin Purvis, and my job is to hunt Babyface Nelson down. He may look like Babe in the Woods, but the man is a killer.
Everyone is afraid of me. Capone, the feds, you name them. Being afraid of me is the smartest thing they've ever done.
He pulls up beside the FBI car and starts opening fire on it. I mean, who does this?
Bank robber Babyface Nelson, spotted en route to Chicago, top speed and guns a-blazing.
Shooting civilians, shooting cops. There's literally nothing he won't do.
That's where the law got me wrong. One thing I'll never do, surrender. If you were walking by me and my gang, you wouldn't notice nothing. Well, nothing different. That bank job in South Dakota for me and the guys, you know, Johnny Dillinger, his pal Van Meter, among others. It's just another working day. But Sioux Falls was the one that put me on the map.
It should have been an unremarkable job. They go into the bank, they leave the very reliable Homer Van Meter out to guard the door. There's another guy in the car. They all have sharply defined roles. Dillinger and another guy, their role is to go behind the vault and grab as much money as they can. Nelson is the designated lobby man. He is to hold and make sure everybody in the lobby stays down and causes no trouble. It's a fairly simple job. You stand there with a gun and look tough and yell loudly at people and attempt to frighten them.
Babyface Nelson liked to lay people down on the floor. He wanted to get his bank-robbing patrons, the people that were in the bank at the time, he wanted mastery over their bodies, physical control over them.
He starts screaming, "Who did that? Who pulled that alarm?"
I'll find out who did it if I have to kill every damn one of you.
He goes crazy, starts yelling and screaming. This is not especially professional in the bank robbing trade. The antithesis of the way John Dillinger likes to roll.
And it's just blatantly obvious if you read the eyewitness accounts that Nelson is essentially acting out scenes that he's seen in some of the movies. Either that or he's just totally lost his mind.
Then Dillinger starts to boss me around. He's shouting, "You're supposed to be the lookout, so just shut up and keep an eye out for the law." Forget that.
And then he takes notice of the motorcycle cop up front. He literally, you can't make this stuff up. He literally jumps up on a table in the lobby with his Tommy gun and starts spinning around, shooting through the windows at the motorcycle cop. And screaming and laughing maniacally like Jimmy Cagney or something from the movies.
Yeah, I clipped one of the bastards. Be better if I killed him, but that'll teach him the best with me.
He wasn't acting objectively, he was acting out of rage, which put everybody in danger. The bank robbers themselves, the police, and the bystanders.
It's this kind of madness that gets me involved. I'm Melvin Purvis, Special Agent in Charge, Bureau of Investigation.
Well, my father at first wanted to join the State Department, and there was no opening there. And then there was the Department of Justice, which was headed by the young J. Edgar Hoover.
I started work for J. Edgar's Bureau at a time when the nation is awash in crime.
We should all be concerned with but one goal, the eradication of crime.
People often talk about the years 1933 and 1934 as this massive crime wave. And it's true, there was an awful lot of crime, especially signature high-level crime, big bank robberies, big kidnappers.
The FBI was a fledgling organization at that point and consisted mostly of lawyers and accountants.
I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic.
They, were paper pushers and trying to track leads and so forth. They were not at the front lines of the shoot 'em up kind of organizations.
We had the best intentions, but little clue how to fight this crime wave or handle guys like Babyface. And this job in Sioux Falls shows us why. He's a maniac. It's his first job with Dillinger, and the two are strange bedfellows.
Dillinger didn't do a lot of talking, but if you study his bank jobs, it's clear that he was a pro's pro. If you look at some of his peers, like, say, Babyface Nelson, who seem to delight in unnecessary gunplay, Dillinger prized brevity.
Stylistically, there's great differences. Dillinger is low-key, relaxed, joking with especially women he encounters in the banks, which partly puts them at ease. Nelson is keyed up, wound really, really tight. He's just a volcano, continually looking for a place to erupt. Quick on the trigger, quick to shoot people. If Dillinger is close to being the gentleman bandit, Babyface Nelson is close to being the homicidal lunatic.
Not 5 minutes into their first job together, Babyface sprays bullets at a cop.
My motto wasn't get in, get out. If I took out a few cops here and there, all the better.
We tend to say that that anyone that we strongly disagree with who was quite evil was insane. But I think that Nelson truly was insane.
Yeah, people said I was crazy. Yeah, right. Crazy like a fox. I just knew what I wanted, and I was prepared to do what had to be done to get it.
Sure, Dillinger's public enemy number 1. But Babyface number 2. With a bullet. With a lot of bullets.
Nelson always wanted to be number 1. I mean, public enemy number 1.
And sure enough, Babyface is shooting his way to the top of Hoover's list. A long way from being a Catholic schoolboy in the Windy City.
Babyface Nelson has the distinction among the 1930s desperados as having been a city boy. He grew up in Chicago's near West Side, and he grew up into a home with a mother who wanted education for her children, and they sent him to Catholic school. But he didn't like Catholic school, and he had all kinds of problems with truancy.
It's pretty clear that his run-ins with the law began even before he was a teenager.
When I was a kid, there were no meaner streets to grow up on. Local hoods would try to push me around. Me.
Babyface Nelson was very short, and he thought he needed to be extraordinarily tough.
Maybe I'm not the biggest guy. Maybe I don't get much respect at first glance. But they say that respect isn't given, it's earned. And I'm ready to earn it. The hard way.
There was a bizarre incident when I think he was 12, where he shot another kid.
Look, it wasn't my fault. Maybe things happen when you're playing with guns, okay? So I get sent to juvie for 2 years. They think I'm gonna come out all smiles and straight as an arrow. Thrown in with all the other bad apples, well, it was more like an underworld finishing school. On the government's dime.
When he comes out of juvie, it appears that the first group that he falls into is a bunch of kids from his own neighborhood who were basically stealing tires. And then from stealing tires, of course, they graduated to stealing cars. He steadily learns more, he becomes more savvy, and he begins to slowly move his way up the criminal ladder. He graduates to becoming kind of an armed robber. They began bursting into the mansions on Lakeshore Drive and in some of the nicer suburbs. You would be in there, let's say you were a millionaire with your wife and daughters eating dinner. They would bust in, tie you up, ask you where the safe was, steal the jewelry, whatever they could get.
In the criminal world, you're nothing without a nickname. And this guy wanted to be called Big George. Nelson was 5'4", so no one bought it. He was well into his 20s when he got his real handle.
This was the sidewalk mugging of the Chicago mayor's wife, in which they held her up on the sidewalk and took all her jewelry. It was a big story in the papers the next day, and shortly thereafter, the mayor's wife, what she said about him famously was the genesis of his nickname, and he had such a baby face.
If you look at photos of him, he has a very, very, very young face, very, very boyish looking. He looks much younger than he actually was.
George Nelson, aka Babyface Nelson, actually hated that nickname, and it was to his partners in crime's best interest not to say it around him.
Just call me George, okay? Anyway, one thing leads to another, and I found myself working for Scarface.
Nelson was able to kind of sign on as a tough guy with a gun with a branch of Al Capone's outfit, based in Cicero. Essentially, he was just kind of anti-union or pro-union muscle. And the fact was, it didn't matter if you were 5'4" and you looked like you were still 14. If you would hold a gun and brandish a gun, or perhaps even use a gun, you could be of use in the Chicago labor and gang wars of the 1920s.
It was a good time, but I'm not much of a team player. Capone's men had to be followers. Me? I'm just my own man.
Nelson was the one nobody trusted. Nobody trusted. Maybe his wife trusted him, and that's it.
Helen Gillis was a mousy, sweet, unassuming little girl.
Babyface Nelson and Helen were very, very close, uncannily so, that he never left her side for very long stretches of time. They eloped and got married under false pretenses, which was pretty common in those days. She listed her age as 18 or 19, and he listed his age as higher. And they got married, and she had a baby that year.
One surmises that Babyface Nelson loved her in part because he could dominate her, because she was utterly loyal to him. She was quiet. She did everything he said.
It's good to know there's always someone on your side. And Helen sticks by me as I climb the criminal ladder. But I make her stand clear when I wake. Robberies, stick-ups, and stealing? Ain't the best place for a lady. And when I do waltz into a dance hall, well, let's just say that my job is, bloody moida. I've worked for Capone. I've paid my dues. But I prefer to be my own boss. And while the big boys make the big headlines, in Chicago in the early 30s, I ply my trade on the quiet and make a killing.
It's funny about Nelson. A lot of the crimes that he was involved in before he became a nationally known bank robber really were not attributed to him till much later. One of the worst, and it was a crime for which he was never prosecuted, it was a particularly nasty dust-up at a dance in the northwest Chicago suburbs, in which Nelson and his little gang burst in and wanted to rob the dance.
But one of the patrons turned out to be a local off-duty police officer who drew his gun. After the police officer shot back at the assailants, the lights went out, and it created pandemonium. And after they left, there were 3 female patrons dead on the floor.
Even all those dead bodies didn't slow him down. He turned right around and did a bunch of bank jobs.
Nelson took the logical next step for a Depression-era criminal. If you were very ambitious, at some point you wanted to be a bank man. If you were a guy, an independent guy on your own, moving up the criminal ladder, the top of the ladder was bank robber. And Nelson wanted to try that.
I tried it and screwed up. The damn bank teller recognized my sweet mug and told the cops where to find me.
Babyface Nelson served some time in Joliet, which was the Illinois State Penitentiary.
If you want to keep me in jail, probably a good idea to keep me in jail. They sent me to court to face another round of charges, but they underestimate what it takes to keep an outlaw down. Escorting me to court in a taxi cab with 1 cop? 1? Not the best plan. I see my chances. And I grab them. So I was en route back to Joliet. Riding a taxi back from the station. Copper in the back with me, driver up front. What they didn't realize was that I was packing heat.
It was unclear how he got it, although it suggested that his wife, Helen, slipped it to him in the courthouse. Produced a gun, put it to the guy's head and said, "You'll be letting me out here." And it was the last time that Nelson was ever in police custody.
Not law enforcement's finest hour. After that caper, Nelson's on the move.
Nelson was put on a kind of underground railroad, if you will, to Reno, and introduced to the two gentlemen who ran Reno, and he became their gopher. And so he goes from being a kid on the streets of Chicago, a would-be bank robber, an escaped prisoner, and within a year, he's now the chauffeur for the gangland boss of Reno, Nevada.
For a man with my talents moving up, I was looking for something a little more active.
Back in those days, still during Prohibition, bootleggers would bring in alcohol, bourbon, whiskey, everything, typically from Canada. From Vancouver, they would run it down the West Coast, just as they did the East Coast, and bring it into secluded coves, and Nelson became a guard on these shipments. And it's here, we believe, that he came to meet a young man named John Paul Chase.
The two are cut from the same dirty cloth. Now, this little man is hatching some big plans.
Nelson and Chase started to commit bank robberies together, and they zigzagged back and forth between Reno and Chicago.
Nelson has a geographical diversity to his career that a lot of outlaws can't claim to. I mean, Nelson was really, well, he wasn't nationally known until the end of his life. He was nationally experienced and nationally traveled.
Me and Chase are pulling all these jobs all over the place, getting bigger and bigger, and yet, whose name do I keep seeing?
Babyface Nelson felt jealousy because he should have been the public enemy at that point, and he wasn't. It always went to Dillinger. And he was immature and crazy enough to make an issue out of that.
Now that he's busted out of Crown Point jail, he's gonna need me more than I need him.
So after Dillinger escaped, he desperately needed people to work with because his gang had all been arrested and they were now facing life imprisonment and death sentences. So he teamed up with Babyface Nelson.
Babyface was great with a gun and utterly fearless in a gunfight. So even though the bank robbers, to be honest, were terrified of Babyface, they wanted Babyface to be part of their bank robberies because they knew he was reliable in the heat of battle.
They joined forces. Apparently, it was actually Babyface Nelson was, the designated leader of that gang per se, but Dillinger got a lot of the print apparently.
What a bunch of idiots. I'm the guy. It's my crew, my planning, my style.
Babyface thought that the name of the gang shouldn't be the Dillinger Gang. It should be the Babyface Gang with John Dillinger. Dillinger didn't quite see it that way.
Fine. Whatever. I'm prepared to let it go. Bottom line is this. If we work together, it's gonna be beautiful.
Babyface and Dillinger together at last. Still, in a way, makes life a little easier for the Bureau. Maybe pick off two public enemies for the price of one. It was Babyface's crew at that point. And that callous shooting of the deputy in Sioux City proved what everyone knew. That Babyface Nelson was the most lethal man in the gang, and he had to be stopped.
Very shortly after the Sioux Falls bank robbery, which was such a disaster, they went right out again. They just went right back, and the next robbery was in Mason City, Iowa, virtually a week later. And it was another fiasco with bystanders and hostages up on the running boards. But what else was Dillinger going to do at this point? He didn't have anybody else to work with. He didn't have a ready-made gang.
Direct orders from Mr. Hoover. Leave no stone unturned. Finally, we get a tip that looks promising.
My father had a call from a U.S. Marshal in Chicago, who had in turn had a call from a man in Rhinelander, Wisconsin.
A gentleman named Emil Wanatka realizes that that really nice guy playing cards in the bar is John Dillinger. And those other guys, that must be his gang.
His gang? That means Babyface. The two of them together in one place? What a prize.
When the teams in Chicago were notified that they had to get to Little Bohemia, they had no time to prepare.
So what Purvis did was he got on an airplane, he chartered a plane with as many guys as he could get from Chicago, called the Minneapolis-St. Paul office and said, you guys get up there too.
They had no time to do anything except throw a couple of shirts in a suitcase. Melvin Purvis had no opportunity to take a look and see what they were dealing with geographically.
We were going in blind, but I had two of America's most wanted men in my sights.
What follows is not only one of the great gun battles of American criminal history, but one of the most embarrassing and saddest chapters in the history of the FBI.
Purvis thinks he can stroll in and slap us in cuffs? I sleep with my eyes open, buddy. Hoover and his boys have been chasing me and Dillinger all over hell and creation. But so far, they're coming up all wet. What a bunch of rubes.
We get a tip that Babyface Nelson is hiding out at a lodge in Wisconsin with his pal Dillinger. Seems like a cakewalk to take them both down, right?
Everything that could go wrong for the FBI at Little Bohemia goes terribly wrong.
The idea of going into a remote inn in the North Woods, nothing in the FBI's history had ever prepared any of them to do this. Most of these kids, they were young, in their 20s, just out of college. How do I use this gun again? They never fired the gun in anger.
So my father arrives at Rhinelander. They commandeer some cars. One of them breaks down. It was terrible weather, sleeting, and it was dark. And it was just, they had no knowledge of the lay of the land at all.
Purvis says the logical thing, that is, boys, some of you go left, some of you go right. Let's circle the place. What he didn't realize was there were dogs. Dogs started barking. A light comes on at the end. Somebody comes out, jumps into a car. All the FBI guys freeze. They're trying to get away. They're trying to get away. The car turns around, puts on its lights, comes out the driveway, starts to gain speed. Purvis and his guys have guns, Tommy guns, yelling, stop, stop.
They don't, and so the FBI just opened fire.
Wasn't us. They plugged a bunch of damn civilians.
They were 3 young civilian conservation corps workers.
Only later did anyone realize that the car radio had been on. So the people in the car couldn't hear anyone yelling stop, and they couldn't see men out in the dark woods.
I hear gunshots, and what do you know? When I look out, I see a mess of G-men. So I do what I do best.
There is an exchange of gunfire. Dillinger and Van Meter and some of his men firing from the second floor of the inn.
But none of these FBI agents were trained in a firefight in the dark in the wilderness.
It's hard to land a shot in the dark, let me tell you. But the feds sure weren't having any more luck.
My father's machine gun jammed. It could make a skeleton get up and dance, but no accuracy at all, but always jamming. And so my father and Nelson exchanged pistol shots.
The FBI guys dive for cover, at which point Babyface and most of the gang runs out the back of the inn.
The agents were in the front. Unknown to them, there was a slope in back of Little Bohemia, an embankment. Below the embankment was the lake.
Dillinger and a couple of the boys head towards the lake. I figured they'd follow him, so I hightail it in the opposite direction.
He crossed over the highway and went in the direction of where he knew he could find people.
He stops at another house, stole a car.
The headlights were bust. couldn't see a damn thing. I got 2 hostages in tow, an entire family of them in the second house, and then another car pulls up. Hell's bells, there are just people crawling out of the woodwork at this point.
He found the owner of Little Bohemia, and it's miraculous at that point that he didn't just kill everybody there.
I tell the owner of this joint, listen, you son of a bitch, get in the car. You're my insurance.
Babyface Nelson, some say, was on a mission to get some revenge. Perhaps in his mind, they had tipped off the authorities and he was going to get even.
Finally, got my hostages, got a new car, and I'm ready to roll.
What Babyface doesn't realize is when he pulled in, the owner called in the local police. And us. And that stalled car bought my team the time to get over there. But when they pulled up, they get more than they bargained for.
Nelson walks up to the window, looks at these 3 guys, immediately makes them for FBI guys.
He said, I know you guys wear bulletproof vests, so I'm gonna give it to you high and low.
And opens fire with a Tommy gun. Agent Newman in the driver's seat, he's hit in the head, falls out unconscious. He lives. Constable Christensen runs out the shotgun side window. He's hit, tumbles over a fence, ultimately lived. The FBI agent in the middle, Carter Baum, is hit. Nelson kept firing.
Babyface didn't need to kill anybody. Babyface was escaping from Little Bohemia very successfully, but he stopped in order to kill the FBI agent Carter Baum, blowing him away with his machine gun.
A gun battle, and Special Agent W. Carter Baum was shot and killed by the thrice paroled Babyface Nelson.
In the wake of Little Bohemia, Melvin was in agony. Melvin was being shamed in the press. Senator Royal Copeland of the U.S. Senate said this is a terrible fumble by the FBI, and the FBI lived or died by the money that Congress gave them. So to have Congress angry at Hoover's FBI, Hoover knew the very life of the FBI was threatened by this catastrophe at Little Bohemia.
Hoover didn't fire me at first, but things changed, and fast.
Hoover brought in one of his favorite desk jockeys from headquarters, an agent named Sam Cowley, a Utah Mormon, and sent him to Chicago to take over the war on crime.
My grandfather had been a member of the FBI for about 5 years. He had risen through the ranks of the FBI very quickly. He had continued to impress with his diligence, with his hard work, with his industriousness, with his ability, with his judgment.
Now, my father was still head of the office, but Sam Cowley was Hoover's man on the spot. And everybody knew that. And he was, I wouldn't say he was a mole, but he was pretty close to it.
I could tell Purvis thought I was just a desk man, that I'd never done any serious field work. I admitted I'd never been in a firefight, but capturing a psychotic killer like Babyface Nelson requires a more subtle approach.
Sam Cowley was, in some ways, J. Edgar Hoover's perfect agent. It served Hoover's institutional aims to have quiet, professional agents. Agents who did not draw attention to themselves when they went to arrest someone, who could even be undercover, but who allowed all the attention and the power and the management duties to flow where Hoover wanted it, which was to his own desk.
He was there for a couple of weeks, reviewed the files. He recommended a special squad be put together with agents who were very well qualified.
Yeah, word on the street is that the feds are making changes, but they're not the only ones. John Dillinger is ready to call it quits.
Dillinger is in Chicago with his last girlfriend, Polly Hamilton, who apparently he was very close to. Dillinger is talking about, I'd just like to get out of here. Maybe you and I can just go away someplace.
One of the stories about Dillinger, in fact, was always that, every job was going to be his last job and he was going to get away. A retirement fantasy.
If the next bank job is gonna be Dillinger's last show, I wanna make it a doozy or die trying.
They partnered up, Nelson and Dillinger, for one final bank job at South Bend, Indiana.
They went to South Bend specifically for a big haul that was supposed to come in, which was a deposit of a payroll that was expected.
If we get the timing right, this is gonna be big. 100 grand, ready for the taking. We need about 5 guys for the job, and frankly, I should be the one calling the shots on this job, not Johnny Dillinger.
Babyface Nelson never viewed Dillinger as an equal.
If you talk to Babyface Nelson, this was Babyface Nelson's gang, and John Dillinger had joined him.
And so he tolerated Dillinger as somebody that he was working with, but never somebody that he was going to defer to.
Me and Johnny Boy will put our differences aside for one last job. But when you bump into a bunch of crazies with a death wish, nothing goes according to plan. After we gave him the what for at Little Bohemia, the feds are up in the game, hot on the trail of me and Dillinger. But we ain't gonna let their new guy, Cowley, rain on our parade. Nah, we got work to do.
When they went into South Bend, it was the usual division of labor.
Dillinger's filling bags. I'm inside doing crowd control. Van Meter's outside. Starts off like any other job. We're shouting, "This is a holdup! Get down on the ground, chumps!"
But police and guards, and now even citizens, began to react.
So suddenly, everybody wants to get in on the action, including a cop who gets a belly full of lead for his trouble.
There's a great deal of confusion as to which one shot Police Officer Wagner.
And bang, bang, shots start coming out of nowhere.
There's a jeweler down the street that takes a shot at Nelson. And if you know Nelson, he's not the type of guy to take a shot and say, "Now I'm gonna run." No, he wants to kill the guy. So Nelson is sitting there shooting at this jeweler when a kid, a high school wrestler, runs out of nowhere and jumps on Nelson's back. And again, it's like, in this case, a movie scene that Nelson didn't want.
I'm thinking, who the hell is this kid jumping on the back of a bank robber with a gun? Is he nuts?
This kid, he jumps on his back and they're circling around, with Nelson with the gun and everything, until Nelson finally shrugs the guy off, takes another shot at the jeweler, and runs for the car, and they eventually all get away.
And the take? Well, that just about covered a couple of hot dogs and a cherry soda.
And because the payroll hadn't come in at the point that they arrived, that they didn't come out with very much from South Bend.
Right after the job, Nelson and John Paul Chase flee to Chicago. Lay low, right? Nope. A few days later, Nelson kills 2 officers when they get on his tail. Maybe he's pathological. Or maybe he's just angry because the bank job wasn't the payout they'd hoped for.
Dillinger wanted South Bend to be his last job. And it was. Not because he got the big payout, but because just 3 weeks later, he got the big payback.
John Dillinger was killed outside the Biograph Theater in July 1934. And the next morning, Babyface Nelson realized public enemy number 1 was dead, and I might just be public enemy number 2.
With Dillinger's death, I get a lot of praise. Too much. Didn't do me one whit of good. Cowley was Hoover's point man now.
He thought that he would be coming home to Washington, D.C. and joining his young family again, but Mr. Hoover sent him a letter directing that he continue on leading the special squad and that the special squad continue to go after Babyface Nelson.
Someone is definitely gonna end up dead. The only question, is it him or me? Babyface knows we're locked on him now. And that makes him more dangerous than ever.
As for me, now that Dillinger's bit the dust, means I'm the marquee star. George Nelson, public enemy number 1. Just don't call me Babyface.
His wife, Helen, and his accomplice, John Paul Chase, hit the road. And hard.
After Dillinger was killed, everything was in a great deal of turmoil.
Nelson did what every other bank guy in Chicago did that weekend. He ran. In Nelson's case, he ran for the area that he knew best. He ran to the West Coast.
Babyface Nelson was a very hot item at that point, and there was a lot of heat on him.
So we try a different tack. Instead of waiting for leads, we start pursuing our own. And that means making friends with some very unsavory people.
They very thoroughly went through and interviewed all the contacts with the gang, and they were very methodical about how they went about it.
We hauled in anyone who had ever even looked in the direction of Babyface and John Paul Chase, and we went through them one by one. We're coming up empty. But then, we have a stroke of luck. Seems like one of the moles loves to chat about her outlaw boyfriends. And after a little sweet talking, she gives me a red-hot lead.
It was John Paul Chase's girlfriend who ended up giving the FBI the tip that Babyface Nelson gang intended to winter in Lake Geneva in Wisconsin.
So we know where he's heading. We just have to lay the trap.
Having received the tip, the FBI took note of that, sent some agents there, including my grandfather, and they waited several days.
We rented a couple of rooms at Lake Como Inn. Then we get an unexpected visitor.
A large car drove up to the house to ask some questions. The agent came out and thought it was actually the owners. And then the car turned around and sped off. And at that point, the FBI agent realized that that was Babyface Nelson and his wife in the car.
He was just looking for a place to stay.
And Nelson turns to Helen and says, "Sure as anything, that was an FBI guy." And the FBI guy on the porch says, "Oh my God, that was Babyface Nelson."
He got the license plate number and telephoned that information to my grandfather in Chicago. So at that point, they knew that Babyface Nelson was speeding towards Chicago in a car with the license plate number that they knew. So my grandfather assigned 2 groups of agents to get on the highway and go the opposite way and see if they could intersect Babyface Nelson.
Melvin Purvis and Sam Cowley send every available agent up to the 4-lane highway that goes up to Wisconsin. One set of agents is driving northwest on the highway as Nelson is coming south. When the FBI passes Nelson, the 2 FBI agents, car driven by an agent, Ryan, pulls a U-turn across the grassy median and comes up behind Nelson.
And then what happens, strangely, is they're looking at the oncoming traffic, and as they say, the worm had turned. They're chasing the medieval dragon, and then the dragon suddenly decides to turn around. Nelson, at that point, he's not in a mental state where he's going to flee. He's in a mental state, he's going to kill these SOBs. Who's chasing me? You don't do this to me.
Son of a bitch! He thinks he can help me like a dog? Huh? Me? Nothing doing, Chief. If the feds are coming to me, I'm gonna take it to them.
Enough lawmen have died. Enough innocents have been slaughtered. That pint-sized psychopath Babyface Nelson is still running wild. He needs to be stopped. And finally, we have a juicy chance to make it happen.
Nelson was hunted by the FBI. He was public enemy number 1. But also, on the other hand, Nelson was also the hunter, not just the hunted.
Those goons want to chase me down? Well, the hell with that.
He's in one of his manic, crazy phases. I think, he just had a lot of adrenaline. He pulls up beside the FBI car and starts opening fire on it. I mean, who does this?
One of their bullets actually hit Babyface Nelson's radiator. The agents, they're not really prepared for a big shootout with the guy with submachine guns. And the agents exchange fire, but they speed off and go ahead of Babyface Nelson.
They go on by and try to get help. At that point, a car drives up, and as luck would have it, it's Sam Cowley, the jowly, clerkish agent who's never fired a gun in anger. He's only been in the field for, a few months. With him is a sharp young agent named Herman Hollis.
Nelson pulled off into a side dirt road, and Hollis in hot pursuit. But then Hollis was unaware that Nelson had already slammed on brakes and went past the car. And so they came to a stop
Babyface tells his wife to roll out of the car and get in the ditch. And she then rolls into the ditch alongside of John Paul Chase.
They want to fight? They came to the right place. I start showering them with lead before they're even out of the damn car.
They're shooting at Babyface Nelson, and John Paul Chase and Babyface Nelson start getting off shots at Samuel Cowley and Herman Hollis.
Babyface was screaming like some wild madman. I'm not sure how many bullets that Nelson took. Maybe like only 18 bullets or something. He still kept coming, firing, like as out of a horror movie.
Herman Hollis gets hit in the head and is killed instantly. My grandfather had 2 shots in the abdomen, and that was enough to drop him.
So you have 3 casualties. At that point, John Paul Chase and Helen come out of the ditch. They pull Babyface Nelson into the car, and they drive to a safe house in Chicago.
So this man came to assist my grandfather at the scene, and my grandfather said to him, "Did they get Hollis? If so, help him forget me." So selfless that he could be concerned for his partner at a time when he was mortally wounded and in great pain.
He's not the only one. I feel like I've been torn apart.
Well, it's pretty clear to Johnny Chase and to Helen, you know, Babyface Nelson's been hit
17 times. They shot me 17 times.
They lay Nelson down on a bed, and from the one account that Helen gave years later, it was, as you would expect from him, all very cinematic. "I'm going, Helen, I can't see, it's getting dark." And he very quietly expired there in a bed in the back bedroom of a stranger's house in suburban Chicago with just Helen and Johnny Chase by his side.
They laid him down next to St. Paul's Cemetery in Niles Center.
Afterwards, they found Nelson in a ditch wrapped in a blanket and with 17 slugs in him.
I think what happened was, crap, we got to get out here. Let's leave it by the side of the road, and it rolled into a ditch. The body did, where it was found the next day.
Hollis dies at the scene. But Cowley, he's still alive. Barely. I head over to the hospital to talk to him before they take him into surgery. Standard procedure. Debrief the agent.
He's still alive when Purvis reaches the hospital an hour or two later, as do an awful lot of reporters. And Purvis does the thing that you're supposed to do first, and that is he talks to Cowley. They were rivals, remember. They didn't particularly get along. Nevertheless, Purvis did the right thing, put his hand on his shoulder and said, "You'll be fine, Sam," knowing it was a lie. "We'll get these guys," knowing it probably wasn't a lie.
So I ask him, what the hell happened out there in Barrington?
And my grandfather identified that it was Babyface Nelson that he had to shoot out with.
And then Sam Cowley issues his last report for the FBI. He said, "I emptied my gun on him."
Cowley died later that night.
He was considered a martyred hero. J. Edgar Hoover at one point said that he was the bravest man that Hoover had ever known.
Sam Cowley is known as a hero today. He was brave. He put his organization and his men first. He was really among the first of a new breed of professional law enforcers that today, 80 years later, we take for granted. Of course, it was always like this. Well, no, it wasn't. And it was men like Sam Cowley who changed things.
The public had strong opinions about a lot of these criminals. They kind of loved John Dillinger in a way, a lot of them did, and Floyd they were fascinated by, but none of them had any good feelings about Nelson. And so when Nelson went down, headlines everywhere, and the public was very supportive of the FBI. They felt that this was one they should have gotten.
And we did get him. Sam Cowley did it at the cost of his own life. But he stood tall in the face of a hail of bullets and the madness of Babyface Nelson. It was starting to look like the war on crime was a war we could finally win.